Hello Guyana, and welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. With me this morning is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency President David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Kumati.
We have two journalists from the local media fraternity. From my left, they are Kiana Wilburg from the Kaieteur News and Ms. Svetlana Marshall from the Guyana Chronicle. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you so much.
This morning, we will be discussing Guyana's green policies in the light of climate change. Mr. President, sir, yesterday you received a courtesy call from the Brazilian Cardinal, and his thrust was to promote the Amazon. Guyana, though a small country, we have large masses of untouched forests. What role do you see Guyana playing in the fight against climate change?
Well, in relation to the Cardinal's visit, I think he was concerned with more spiritual than environmental matters. It is true that the Amazon is a very important part of the world's surface, and he said that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, was particularly interested in the Amazon. Of course, it's an area, the Amazon is the world's largest river, and we are part of the Amazonian complex of rivers and forests and so on. So we are regarded as the lungs of the earth. So he saw, and I saw, and presumably the Pope, all Guyana, see the Amazon as an important element in climate change. Now, tomorrow I will be in New York. I will sign the agreement at the United Nations. And that is part of an international agreement which will deal with various aspects of climate change, sustainable development, global warming. Guyana is a low-lying coastal state. At least the coastline of Guyana is particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels. So we are interested in reducing global warming to below the levels which have been agreed in Paris last year. So I will be going there in a few hours' time to sign on to that agreement. So it's very important, but the Cardinal's visit, I think, as I said, is spiritual rather than environmental. He's concerned about the indigenous people, many of whom are still living in the Amazon rainforest area, and that is part of his concern. Environmental as well as spiritual.
Thank you, sir. Journalists, you're now invited to pose your questions on the topic.
Okay, Mr. President. You would have identified, for example, Bartica to be a green town. What are some of the projects and programs you would like to see maybe the mayor and town council there implement to help combat global warming at that local level?
Well, first of all, I would like to see the responsible disposal of solid waste. Right now, there are some open pits which are a hazard, and that is one area. The second area is energy. We need to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels, diesel and gasoline, and use more sustainable energy for the lighting Bartica, use more wind power, solar power. We'd like to see the recycling of materials, plastics particularly, cardboard and paper. And we'd like to see more tree planting. One for food. I did, invite Bartica last year at the National Tree Day to plant one breadfruit tree in every yard. And it helps provide food because you've got 15,000 household residents there, and that will equate to about 5,000 households, or 3,000 to 5,000 households. And we want to see Bartica green, looking green, so all of the mined out areas will eventually be replanted through a program of reforestation. So it is not just one side, it is energy, it is solid waste disposal, it's recycling, it's replanting and reforestation, and other areas of sustainable development.
Kiana?
Thank you. Mr. President, two areas. With regard to climate change and the implementation of projects and efforts in this regard, I believe Norway allocated certain sums of money for a matrix of projects. Could you give the nation your thoughts on the perhaps management of these resources under the previous administration? And could you say how your government's matrix of projects differ in terms of the policy you would like to implement again, as opposed to the matrix of projects that was implemented under the previous administration?
Well, the previous administration was concerned about low carbon development strategy. And it was concerned with the direction of some of the funds to projects such as Amerindian recycling of lands and also generation of energy through the Milo Falls hydropower project. We would like to look at climate change more broadly. We'd like to look at reforestation of mined out areas. We'd like to look at the generation of energy. Apart from hydropower, we like to look at solar farms and wind power farms rather than just these little panels. We like to look at recycling, and we like to look at coastal zone management. The previous plan did not include much about coastal zone management, and that is an area of vulnerability. As you know, sea defenses from time to time crack and salt water invades the agricultural areas. We'd also like to look at combating the impact of El Nino, because particularly in Rupununi, which is our largest region, occupies nearly a quarter of our land space. As you know, El Nino has had a very severe impact on the Rupununi in particular, and it's cyclical. You might miss it 2 or 3 years, but then it comes again. So we have to look at measures to provide reservoirs for water so that animals, well, human households first, and animals and crops would be provided with water throughout the year. And so these are some of the areas that we are examining. And tomorrow at United Nations, I'll be required to make a statement which will deal with the measures that we intend to implement, not only in terms of developing the economy, but also in ensuring that we lower the level of emissions of these greenhouse gases.
Mr. President, if I could just take you back to the first aspect of my question, which was, could you share your thoughts with the nation with regard to how the resources, for example, those allocated by Norway, what are your thoughts on how these resources were managed under the previous administration?
I don't want to comment on what the previous administration did. As I said before, in broad terms, it is our view that the allocation was too narrow. And we are broadening it to deal with coastal zone management and other forms of energy generation. So it is not just about land titling, it's not just about the Milo Falls, it is about making sustainable energy available to a wider part of the population, not just handing out a few solar panels, but having whole communities powered by solar energy, whole schools, now that we're creating these what they call the capital towns at Mabaruma, Bartica, Madia, and Lethem, we want to see the townships powered by energy without relying on petroleum or dieseline. This is one of the problems. Up to now, Mabaruma gets only 5 hours of electricity a day. So the problem of energy and environment are much beyond the plans or programs implemented by the previous administration. We have a wider view, a longer view, a strategic view.
Okay, Mr. President, you would have mentioned reforestation. Is there, based on your discussion with the Natural Resources Minister, have you maybe discussed areas where there were a widespread deforestation due to mining or other activities that you would want to first direct your attention, okay, at area X, we will start the reforestation process and then move to other locations? Could you cite areas?
The most severely damaged areas are Pataro Siporoni, that's region 8, around Madia, region 7, that is the Kuyuni Mazruni, and to some extent, Burima Waini region 1, around Port Kaieteur area. Those areas are scarred, badly scarred, and those are the priority candidates for reforestation.
Kiana?
Nothing further from me on this topic.
Can we get on to hotter stuff?
Svetlana, do you have any more questions on the topic? Okay, we can now move to the open segment, and I'll start us off. Mr. President, yesterday your Minister of State, Mr. Joseph Harmon, he signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian High Commissioner in Guyana, Mr. Mahalingam, to establish ICT Center of Excellence here. The project is valued at US $1 million, and you've often spoken to the importance of the STEM subjects in the development of Guyana. How do you see the ICT Center of Excellence pushing this focus?
Well, there are two main areas. One, that Center of Excellence, and we're very grateful to the government of the Republic of India, will be located in the National Data Management Authority, which has been underused. Many people don't even know it exists at the University of Guyana campus at Turkine. And it will be aimed mainly at training of persons to function within the public service and other branches of the state. But in addition to that, we are working on the utilization of the former Ogle Estate compound to create a campus for public service training, foreign service training. And that institution is likely to have, in the short term, 4 faculties, and one of those 4 faculties will be information and communication technology. So we hope to use the grant to propel the public service initially into the greater use of information communication technology, both at the National Data Management Authority at Turkine and at the Public Service Staff College at Ogle.
Thank you, sir. Journalists, you can now pose your questions.
Last week you had a cause to boost security at the Georgetown prison due to maybe the absence of approximately 13 prison officers. Mr. President, could you update us on reports, the latest set of reports you would have received on operations there, conditions at the Camp Street prison? Because some residents are concerned, some residents are saying that, you know, they feel safe with the joint services present there.
The problems of the prison service and the prison system are chronic. You remember about 18 years ago, there was a massive riot at Mazaruni, and several buildings were burned down. Over the years, there have been escapes, and the most memorable or the most notorious was in the infamous Mashramani escape in 2002. Prisoners would go on the roof, and stuff would be thrown into the prison. The major problems are, one, that the 3 main prisons in Guyana, New Amsterdam, Georgetown, and Mazruni, were all constructed over 125 years ago. In the reign of Queen Victoria. They are inadequate for the numbers of prisoners we have now. In particular, Georgetown is probably carrying close to maybe 3 times the amount of prisoners it ought to have. Now, the problems will not be resolved unless there is a massive redeployment of prisoners from Georgetown, particularly, ignore New Amsterdam for the time being, to Mazaruni. Mazaruni has the space, and it needs to be reinforced and fortified. The second big problem is the staff. And we have arranged for the staff to, within the Ministry of Public Security, to have enhanced training on the police force. The third problem is the overcrowding, which is a consequence of the criminal justice system. So the prison service does not really have control of that. If the magistrate remands somebody to prison, or the judge remands somebody to prison, the prison service is obliged to keep that person. So as you know, there's been an engagement between the executive branch and the judicial branch to examine sentencing policy to ensure that custodial sentences, or perhaps remands, or the denial of bail would be reviewed so that there's no huge buildup of persons in the prison, particularly Georgetown prison. And the Chancellor was at that meeting, and of course the Prime Minister represented the executive branch, and the Chancellor, Chief Magistrate, and other judicial officers represented the judicial branch. So we've got to look at all of those factors together, the capacity and the condition of the prisons, the lack of staff, insufficient staff, and of course the quality of staff, and of course the sentencing policy. And even in 2002, when we had the notorious break, many of the persons who would protest on the roofs, and many of the persons who did escape, were in fact on remand. And this seems to be a cause of anger, because persons who've committed offenses and feel they might have received punishments for their crimes are less likely to rebel than persons who feel that they're being held there unjustly and their matters are not coming up for hearing. So we've got to look at all those factors, and there is evidence that a large amount of contraband items had been taken into the prisons. Cigarettes, ganja, maybe metal weapons, cell phones. People have Facebook accounts. And it is impossible for that level of contraband traffic to have occurred without the complicity of a few rogue officers. So it is a big problem, and it has existed for several years. Of course, the March fire or the March riot was worse than ever before in terms of the number of people killed. But in terms of physical destruction, under the previous administration, I think it was in 1999, several buildings were burned down. So we will not solve those problems unless, or we will not solve the problem of administration of our correctional service unless we deal with those items: the sentencing policy, staffing, and the physical infrastructure of the prisons. Those are the main problems.
But could you say what is the situation now, the current situation at that particular prison?
I would say the situation is stable and it is being normalized. But I admit that what passes for normalcy is inadequate. We still need to provide secure facilities at Mazaruni for a greater number of prisoners and move more prisoners. We've already done that after the March riot, and as you know, I went to Mazaruni with the Minister of State and the Minister of Public Security, and we have initiated some plans for the transfer of prisoners to the facilities at Mazaruni. This is continuing, and money has to be provided to build new blocks at Mazaruni. At the same time, persons who are on remand are having their cases reviewed. And I would say that all in all, to answer your question, the situation is approaching normalcy and approaching stability. And we use the cordon of the soldiers and the policemen to reduce the incidence of persons throwing things over the wall of the prison. And that is the main purpose of the cordon. Eventually the cordon will be fully removed, and the number of persons on remand in Georgetown will be reduced.
Kiana.
Thank you. Mr. President, so much has been said about your government's intention to right some of the irregularities in the broadcasting sector. But there seems to be some confusion as to the direction GNBA wants to take on some of these matters. One, for example, is whether to revoke some of the radio licenses, which some believed were unethically given out, as opposed to issuing new licenses. Sir, would you say in hindsight that the promise to right some of these irregularities perhaps has proven to be too difficult to keep?
I don't think it's too difficult. We need to adopt a policy or a principle. And the principle, if something is wrong, it's wrong, and it has to be corrected. You can't correct something that's wrong by multiplying the amount of wrong cases, hoping that they'll even out. Mm-hmm. So things which are wrong or outside of the law will be rectified.
Do you have any follow-ups?
Another question.
Great.
Okay.
It's open season.
Okay. Two questions because it's linked to the same individual. Do you believe that the Honorable Minister of State, Joseph Harmon?
You didn't mention that before, did you?
No, I'm saying this question.
I thought you said they're linked.
The first question in this regard, do you believe that the recent fiasco surrounding the minister has hindered the party's stance with its supporters? That's one. And there's been some controversy as to whether the fiasco, whether Mr. Harmon's actions bordered on breaching the code of conduct, the proposed code of conduct. So in the interim, could you tell the nation what you have in place to ensure that ministers stay in line regardless of what may be pending in the meantime?
Well, the word or the use of the word fiasco as an invention of some of the persons who've been reporting on the matter. I don't know that there is a fiasco. I know that the Minister of State went to the People's Republic of China on official government business. When he was in China, that business was transacted and he presented a report to the cabinet. While he was there also, he traveled to 4 cities on matters which had an impact on government of Guyana business. There's no fiasco as far as I'm concerned. Secondly, I don't, as I said, the minister reported to the cabinet and statements were published in the press. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no evidence that there's been any breach of a code of conduct. Perhaps things could have been handled differently, but this is a matter that was ventilated at cabinet. Other people seem to have other interests in pursuing this notion that there was a fiasco. But up to now, people are reporting that one of the outcomes of the visit was the fact that the previous administration seems unable to account for about $5 million US in the transfer of GT&T shares. That was the business that Minister Harmon was all about. And nobody's speaking about that is the fiasco, where the $5 million went to.
And just to follow up on that, will the government pursue an investigation into what really happened in that regard?
Of course we have to pursue and investigate. $5 million US is a lot of money. You could build a lot of schools with that.
Svetlana?
Okay, the Durban Park project, recently you would have transferred that project from the Ministry of the Presidency to the Ministry of Public Infrastructure. Why at this stage, given the fact that independence is just about maybe a month away?
Well, when we started the project, we were looking for an appropriate site, an appropriate public place where most of the residents of the capital could congregate to see public ceremonies. And we investigated the what is called the National Park. We investigated the military and police compounds at Ivleria and Ayangana. And we felt that was the most suitable. We all remember what happened on 26th of May 2015 when there was a huge congestion at the National Stadium. And it was finally decided to settle on Durban Park, which is in fact quite spacious when you get to look at it. Now, initially, the budget for 2015 had not catered for the works there, and we had to wait until the budget for 2016 was passed. So in the meantime, we got some assistance from civil society and the corporate community to initiate works. The works have come to the stage in which we feel that the government of Guyana needs to inject public funds and not rely on the support of the corporate community, which was given voluntarily. Many people have assisted in cleanup. Many people have assisted in the rehabilitation of the 1966 Independence Monument. In fact, Banks DIH is going to be constructing 2 monuments in the form of Independence arches, one at the entrance of the city at Agricola. Well, for you Barbicians, I suppose Cummings Lodge is the entrance to the city. So the corporate community has come forward to help. At this point in time, as far as Durban Park is concerned, it is a national project, it is a national priority, and it was my considered opinion that the national government should be more involved, and we have thanked the corporate community for the assistance in bringing the project up to where it is now. Well, we can take it from here. But I think the Minister of Public Infrastructure is confident that he'll be able to bring the Durban Park up to acceptable international standards within the next month. So it may be late, but it's not too late. But you'll get quality.
But the cost implication, would there be any cost implication?
Of course there'll be cost implications. The cost will be provided by the state. But as I said, we are grateful for the assistance provided by the corporate community up to the present time. People still come forward to help. Even, for example, in the provision of bicycles for school students. These are not paid for by the state. Businessmen, some quietly, some don't want the names publicized, will give 25 bikes here, 25 bikes there. And you see my wife handing them out, Lethem, Abaruma, Rose Hall. So Guyana is really working as a nation in which civil society, the state, and other sectors are prepared to help, rather than stand aside with their hands in their pockets, with their hands folded. So we're very grateful for their assistance, whether it's bicycles or the national park.
Kiana?
Thank you. Mr. President, you had expressed hope last year, May, that you would want to see an improved level of debate within the Parliament. Given that some level of mudslinging is still maintained, would you say that you're disappointed?
No, I wouldn't call it mudslinging. That's another invention. What is happening is debate. Debate has always been robust. If you look back at what has been happening in the Parliament for the last 50 years, you'd see that the two sides, sometimes more, sometimes less adversarially, have been engaged in combat. There was a time when members of the present opposition party actually threw glass at the speaker. People threw down the law books. People brought flour and scattered it. You haven't seen anything yet. So what you're seeing now is quite mild with some of the scenes we had in the 1970s. But there's always room for improvement. Sometimes school children come to visit the National Assembly, and we would like them to be exposed to the civil debate. But there will always be robust engagement between the two sides. And we try to keep it in line. And from time to time, I would speak to the leader of the House or the chief whip. And similarly, I hope that the whip on the opposition side would observe the same conventions of cordiality.
We have time for one last question. Svetlana, that goes to you.
Okay, the Guyana Police Force statistical report has indicated that there has been a 14% reduction with respect to serious crimes. However, this week and maybe last week, we had cases where